Okay, so in this one, we're going to get ready and prepare for the 2.07 writing and DBA. And in this one, you are to pick your own Hellenistic sculpture. So on this slide here, you see several options. These are all great options to talk about. So I'm going to talk about generals. What you'll do is once you pick the one you want, you'll have to research it further in terms of the facts, like where was it found, who made it, where, just kind of just general information, what time period, all that good stuff. So I'm going to talk about more of the style characteristics. So Hellenism was kind of characterized by emotion. And what I love about Hellenism is that you can really see the progression of Greek sculptors. First phase was archaic, where the Greek sculptors were just learning to sculpt the human body. So it came across as slightly rigid and not really defined. And to make it more lifelike, they put on those cheesy, archaic smiles. Then, as they're perfecting and really studying the body, came the Greek classical period, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But at that point, the Greeks understood how to take a stone mass, like a big piece of stone, sculpt it in a way that gave off realistic proportions of a figure and a pose and the body shift, and it looked perfect. And so then they were going, okay, well, now that I've perfected that Greek kind of sculpture, that figure, where do I go from here? And that's where Hellenism steps in because Hellenism said, okay, let's take it a step further, make it more realistic. Well, how do I make perfection more realistic? And that's where you get the human connection, the idea of emotions, the idea of kind of movement and energy and drama. And it became more about just understanding the body, but it became about telling more of a story and a narrative. So in this grouping here, one thing that you're going to notice that Hellenism does well is the introduction of fabric and clothing. And not only the introduction of fabric and clothing, but how to make it appear like it's tangible, like it actually has movement within it. So on this far right one, this is a great example where the fabric feels like the wind is blowing and the fabric actually is pressing against the body. And it's a very thin fabric because we can see the belly button, but yet it's very like um, we can get that illusion that it's kind of like this thin linen that's pressed up against her body. And it has the movement and the energy of being blown by the wind. And I think that's super impressive, just knowing that it's a hunk of stone. Okay. Or when we're talking about emotion and being relatable on this bottom left one, we're talking about like an athlete. But instead of seeing the athlete in a winning pose or a stoic pose, we see the realistic idea of an athlete maybe being defeated or tired, and we can get that sense through the facial expression. Same thing with this dying gull. His body is kind of hunched over. His head is hung down low in a kind of defeatist or injured manner. So with Hellenism, you just have to realize that as you're looking through this, I want you to pay close attention to the subtle details of the facial expression, the energy that might have been evoked through the fabric, or just even the body posture. Here we have, again, referencing the one on the right. She's standing strong, her leg is forcefully moving forward, or it can even be more subtle. So, like this Venus de Milo, the one in the center, it seems more subtle, but her cloth is just ever so draped across her body. And even though this is the most subtle out of all of them, we see the shift in the body weight there as she's just kind of posing more realistic and a more natural response. Okay. So, emotions, drama, energy, movement, but more importantly, relatability, telling a narrative story. Let's compare that to classical because I'm going to ask you in the DBA, once you kind of tell me the characteristics that you see in this piece, in the Hellenistic piece, how does that differ? So, if you had to back up a step and go, okay, classical was about perfection. Well, let's remember what that looked like. Okay. So, in this slide, Most of the classical sculptures are going to be male. And one of the thing that you wanted to focus on is the fact that they're all very like non-expressive. Okay. Classical was more about perfection and the concept of something being idealized and not so much as a realistic person like that shares realistic motions of anger and sadness and sorrow, but more or less this just general kind of serious tone. And so to me, a classical is known by the long gazes, almost like they're staring off into space in deep philosophical thought. Their bodies are almost like gracefully, like no one stands like this. It's almost like, look at me, Mr. Hollywood, as I move very slowly through the space. And people don't stand or walk like that. Again, it was kind of showing the perfection of the body. Now, one of the big things that classical advancements kind of showcase was this idea of contrapposto. Contrapposto is a tilt in the hip. So see how like this hip is slightly higher and it tilts down. Same thing here and same thing here. And what they did learned is that when a person stands, we don't put our mass, like our body weight, equally on both legs. What we tend to do is put our body weight mainly on one leg and then kind of have the other leg slightly resting or relaxed. And that's what you see here. So when we're talking about perfection and realistic, they realistically understood how to take a hunk of stone, which I think is super impressive. Like it's just a massive stone, and sculpt it in a way that mimics real life body postures and body stance. Not the way they're standing, but how they're standing. And so this is where they discovered mass and weight, and that's through the contrapposto. So that's why a lot of the figures you can see this is the relaxed leg. This is the leg that's holding all of the weight. This is the relaxed leg, and this is the weight that, or the leg that's holding the weight. And so you get this contrapposto feel. And so that was a really big key thing with classical. So definitely check out and look at more classical sculptures and just note the physical, like the visual differences between what you're seeing here and how we're seeing that progress in Hellenism. Okay, so that's it for this video. Hopefully this is helpful as you begin your 2.07 writing.